What if Hurricane Katrina wasn't the real storm? Katrina is remembered as one of the deadliest disasters in American history. More than 1,800 people lost their lives, hundreds of thousands were forced from their homes, and the damage climbed towards $200 billion. The explanation has always seemed obvious. A massive hurricane struck New Orleans, but when Katrina reached the city, it wasn't at its strongest. It wasn't the storm people had been warned about just days earlier. By hurricane standards, it was relatively mild, not unprecedented, not record-breaking, and not beyond what the region had faced before. New Orleans has endured storms like it, which leaves us a question we rarely stop to ask. If this was not an extraordinary storm, why did it produce an extraordinary disaster? Friday, August 26th, Katrina had already crossed Florida and emerged over the Gulf of Mexico. Early that morning, it regained hurricane strength, and forecast models began to shift west, away from the Florida Panhandle and toward the central Gulf Coast. With that shift, Louisiana and New Orleans moved inside a cone that tightened with each new advisory. The state declared an emergency that same day, and the tone of official messaging changed. This was no longer a storm to monitor casually. It was a storm to prepare for. Over the next 24 hours, Katrina strengthened over the warm waters of the Gulf, reaching major hurricane status as it grew larger and more organized. Authorities began issuing evacuation notices to encourage residents to leave early before key travel routes became blocked. To support this effort, tolls were suspended and designated evacuation routes were opened. In New Orleans, Mayor Ray Nagin declared a state of emergency and called for a voluntary evacuation. At the same time, he announced that the Louisiana Superdome would open as a refuge of last resort for anyone without the means or ability to leave the city. The language was careful but unmistakable. This was not a place of comfort. It was a place to survive. If you went there, you were expected to bring what you could carry: food, water, something to sit on, and prepare to wait.
4 days. We've really been out here 4 days.
As night fell, the hurricane watch became a hurricane warning, and forecasters grew more direct about the risk. The storm was intensifying quick. On Sunday morning, the city made the call it had been delaying. New Orleans issued a mandatory evacuation order. For many residents, leaving at that point was no longer simple. They didn't have cars, money for travel or hotels, or the physical ability due to health conditions. By midday, the Superdome opened. People arrived carrying bags, coolers, folding chairs, whatever they could manage. By nightfall, tens of thousands were inside. Overnight into Monday, the weather worsened steadily. The disaster's defining problems started to emerge within the city's protective system before dawn. Storm surge pushed into a network of canals and waterways that surrounded New Orleans, and pressure built against levees and flood walls that had been designed to keep water out. In several places near the Industrial Canal, those defenses began to fail. Water started moving into parts of the city where it wasn't supposed to go. Around the same time, the Superdome lost power, followed by large parts of the city. Hurricane Katrina made landfall southeast of New Orleans as a strong Category 3 storm. This was significantly weaker compared to its strength when it was offshore, and also less intense than historical storms. As Katrina moved north, storm surge was funneled through Lake Borgne and into the engineered corridors around the city. The Mississippi River outlet and the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway became part of the storm's path. Water converged in a narrow channel that locals and engineers would later refer to simply as the funnel. Soon after, the lower Ninth Ward's levees were breached, causing the water level to rise rapidly. Inside homes, people made decisions about whether to stay on the floor or move upstairs, retreat into attics, or break through their roofs. As pressure increased, levees along the Industrial Canal were overtopped, and then one of them failed catastrophically. A huge wall of water barreled into the lower Ninth Ward. The force of the moving water swept buildings away and caused them to collapse. Streets were inundated, turning into moving currents, and houses near the breach were lifted from their foundations. The city's pumping systems were failing in key places. Water was rising on both sides of the canal, and there was no functioning way to drain it.
We are dealing with 8 to 10 inches of rain in 3 hours. It is not going to be able to pump that.
Flash flood warnings went out, urging residents in Orleans and St. Bernard to get to higher ground immediately. Within a short span of time, multiple feet of water covered large sections of the lower Ninth Ward.
It was like a freight train coming through there, howling noise it was making.
My first instinct when we saw the levee break was, this is bigger than 9/11. I thought that the fatalities would be in the, thousands, if not tens of thousands.
This is worse than a smoking gun. This is like a smoking cannon.
As the morning continued, more failures followed. Breaches along the London Avenue Canal sent water into Gentilly. Another break sent water into nearby neighborhoods. Then the 17th Street Canal failed, allowing water to pour into Lakeview and West End. This is why the flooding felt so total. Water wasn't coming from one direction. It was entering from multiple points into a city that had no natural way to drain once the pump stopped. By late morning, some areas were flooded deeply enough that rooftops disappeared. Adjacent counties were almost entirely underwater. In parts of New Orleans, flooding was now measured in feet. By early afternoon, officials confirmed multiple breaches. Emergency calls poured in with people trapped in attics and on rooftops. Rescue crews tried to reach as many as they could before nightfall, knowing that darkness would make everything more dangerous. That night and into Tuesday, the situation deteriorated in a quieter but more devastating way.
From breaking into roofs with small hand axes, from swimming 100 yards in chemical-infested water, from just about anything you could ever imagine being physically demanded, we did it.
With the city still underwater, thousands found themselves stranded. As vital supplies, food, water, and medical aid dwindled, conditions inside the various shelters deteriorated.
There's 6 bodies upstairs on the 3rd floor. This morning I found one lady in a wheelchair dead in the ladies' bathroom and another lady laying on the floor by the ladies' bathroom dead. And then there's this guy right here that's dead that's been sitting out here for a while. And they're not moving the bodies. It's the smell of dead bodies inside. It's the smell of feces, the urine. It's just terrible. It's an awful situation to have to live in.
By midweek, officials began acknowledging a grim reality. The breaches could not quickly be closed and the city would not drain. Without power and pumping, New Orleans would remain underwater. Search and rescue efforts continued in successive waves, and helicopters were used to airlift people off rooftops, while boats navigated the streets. They were passing beneath traffic lights suspended over open water. With immediate crisis subsiding and logistics becoming the focus, evacuation efforts took precedence. People were relocated from hospitals, shelters, and waterlogged neighborhoods, and this is where Katrina stopped being just a storm story and became a displacement story.
This is like a city under siege.
Families climbed onto rooftops as helicopters hovered helplessly above, but even the Coast Guard was inundated, struggling to reach everyone in a city where the need for rescue far outpaced the ability to respond. As floodwaters swallowed the neighborhood, a man paddles his canoe through what used to be city streets, calling out for anyone left behind. He notices a dog tied to a rooftop, trapped and exhausted. He climbs up, unties it, and gives it water, a small act of humanity in a disaster defined by absence. In the days after the storm, people began looting simply to survive, taking food, water, and basic supplies. Some police tried to stop it, while others said the same thing everyone else was thinking: you do what you need to stay alive.
Can't say you're welcome to it, but you gotta do what you gotta do to survive.
The return of residents was severely delayed, with many not coming back for a year, and some never returning at all. Families were scattered far and wide, seeking refuge in shelters, with relatives, in hotels, and in other states. The social fabric of neighborhoods was torn apart by these distances. As the city worked to recover, another question began to surface about the storm itself. Katrina itself was not unprecedented, but why was the damage so catastrophic? Storms like this are not new. What is new is a city disappearing. The reason lies with the people and institutions that were meant to keep that from happening. In the days after Hurricane Katrina, the explanation offered by authorities was simple, and at first, reassuring. They said the flooding was unavoidable and that it was the result of an overwhelming storm, an act of God. Again and again, officials used the same word to describe what had happened to New Orleans' defenses: overtopped. The image they were trying to paint was clear. Water had simply risen too high. The system had done what it could, but nature had done done the rest. The implication was obvious. Nobody was responsible. But if history tells us anything, someone is always responsible. Unfortunately, accountability remains elusive. As the water settled, the damage told a more complicated story. Flooding wasn't uniform. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed while others nearby remained largely intact. Water appeared to have arrived suddenly and violently, pouring in from specific points rather than rising evenly across the city. For the people on the ground and for engineers who began examining the damage, the official story didn't quite align with what they were seeing. As investigations moved forward, the language began to shift.
To question the integrity of all the other flood walls in the system.
Because overtopping simply implies a system was pushed beyond its limits. Structural failure means something else entirely. It means the system broke because it was built in a way that allowed it to. What investigators found was failure. At many of the canals, the failure was not singular. Flood walls slid sideways, collapsed at their base, and in some cases, gave way completely, allowing the walls of water to surge into neighborhoods that had been protected just hours earlier. Shockingly, the canals were meant to be inspected every single year for soil erosion, a basic safeguard designed to prevent breaches. Those inspections never even happened, and incredibly, most officials didn't even know that they were required. So for decades, erosion quietly ate away at the system until Katrina finally pushed an already compromised defense past the point of collapse.
It was like one of these documents that goes into the file system, never to be read.
At a Senate hearing, officials admitted the inspections were purely visual, just looking at the levees, which can't detect internal erosion.
My hearing that we do not have the capacity to determine whether the kind of structural damage that was occurring over a period of time could have been identified and then prevented?
Senator, I believe that, from a visual, we typically do visual inspections. I don't know of any physical inspections that the levee district or the Corps does.
And despite all of this, the canal levees were designed to last and should not have collapsed at all. Even if the inspections had been done properly, they should have shown the system was safe. So the real question is, what was actually happening beneath the surface? The answer was neither mysterious nor newly discovered. The flood protection system had been built on shallow foundations. Steel sheet piling had been driven too short into unstable soil. Critical assumptions about the soil strength had been wrong, not in hindsight, but at the time they were made.
It shows that the side was eroded like Mr. Chatry had anticipated.
Engineers had raised concerns about these vulnerabilities years before Katrina, documenting them in a 2009 report by the National Research Council. Still, in the weeks following the storm, attention remained fixed on Katrina itself. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, responsible for much of the system, initially emphasized the storm's size and intensity, framing the disaster as a natural event beyond reasonable control. But as investigations unfolded, that explanation became increasingly difficult to sustain. Unfortunately, accountability largely ended there, and yet even as the physical failures became clearer, they did not fully explain why the disaster became so deadly, because the flooding was only the beginning. As the physical barriers failed, the emergency response system began to falter as well. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, tasked with coordinating disaster relief, struggled to adjust to the scale and speed of what was unfolding. Requests for aid became caught in procedural delays, while critical supplies remained staged far from the city, waiting for authorization. Even offers of outside assistance were declined or postponed because they did not follow the correct chain of command. What emerged was not chaos, but something quieter and more damaging, a kind of institutional paralysis. Inside New Orleans, the consequences of that paralysis were immediate and unmistakable. Thousands of people remained trapped in the Superdome as food and water ran out. Medical needs went unmet and sanitation deteriorated rapidly. With each passing hour, conditions worsened. But the system they were operating within had been designed for coordination during routine emergencies, not for improvisation in the face of a catastrophe. And when the speed mattered the most, it simply could not move fast enough. At the local level, leadership was dealing with the consequences of years of poor emergency planning.
Response authorities would say it's a disaster. It's hard to get stuff in there. It's hard to fly the helicopters and the trucks in there.
Man, I don't want to hear any of that. This is a national disaster on U.S. soil. And if we can deploy troops around the world, we're talking about 500,000 people, and with all the resources that this state and this country has, it should have gotten done quicker.
The city lacked a comprehensive plan for a disaster of this size. The Superdome had been designated as a refuge, yet it was never stocked or prepared to function as one. In the months and years that followed, lawsuits tied to deaths, injuries, and displacement moved through the courts. Some named the city, others named Nagin personally, reflecting the public's demand for accountability. But the courts largely treated his decisions as discretionary actions made during an emergency, shielding him from personal liability under doctrines of government immunity. Many cases were quietly settled, others were dismissed outright. The legal process narrowed responsibility, concentrating blame on individual figures while insulating the broader system that shaped those decisions in the first place. Nagin had played a role, but he was only one spoke in a much larger wheel, turning within a structure that had already accepted risk as normal long before Katrina arrived. What happened in New Orleans cannot be traced to a single failure. It was the result of a chain of decisions, engineering shortcuts, institutional blind spots, bureaucratic rigidity, and political incentives, all designed to function smoothly under normal conditions. When those conditions disappeared, the structure they supported collapsed with them. The hurricane did not create the disaster. It exposed a system that had already broken. If you want to keep exploring real stories that are hard to believe, you can subscribe below. More of them are on the way. And thank you for watching.